So once again, hi everyone. Very good evening for joining this session. So today we'll have a stack selection session. So overall, like we have in-house mentor Lyle Rodriguez and Prasant Chaudhary. So who will be going to walk you through the stack selection process. And I will request from the team, please open up and try to ask as many as questions and queries you have. And if you have any queries, put it on the chat box, or maybe you can unmute yourself and try to speak up. And by the meantime, I will request from each team to put their team name and slash if it is a hardware or software in the chat box, so that we'll come to know how many teams are there in this call. And out of that, how many are into the hardware and into the software. So please put your team name slash hardware or software in the chat box. So now I would like to over to Prashant or Lan. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Vikram. All right. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well. Cool. So today, me and Prashant are going to be talking with you guys on architecture and stack selection, right? What are the different components of a large system? What is a tech stack? We're going to be posing these questions more than answering them, and we're going to need a lot of input from you guys, right, in directing the conversation. So please, be ready to unmute at any time, and also keep the chat box handy. So cool, let's get started. So let's just jump right in by asking, what is a tech stack? So use both the chat and you feel free to unmute, and let's discuss, right? What does a tech stack mean?
Right. Have you guys heard about this term, that these two terms used together, tech stack? Kabhi bola hai? Have you heard this? Let's start there.
No, sir.
Okay. Anyone, have you heard these words, two words together, tech stack, technology stack? What is MERN stack? Okay. Yeah, sure. That's a tech stack. Cool. Right direction. Cool. Anyone else? The tools, frameworks, which for a project. Fairly accurate. Cool. In the right direction. Anyone? You can make jokes also. Like if you have already jokes around tech stack, please, more than welcome. Because I hadn't. I wanted to crack one, so I thought we'll delegate. No. Okay. No worries. So I think what Sai Akash has said is pretty close to what a tech stack really is, right? Yeah, it's a set of frameworks or tools, right? Both for hardware and software, right? Which could be microcontrollers, microprocessors, some already created framework for front end, some frameworks for back end, right? Different components, right? Which make an entire tech solution, right? An end-to-end tech solution, right? So, let's say that if you want to break it, right, to a smaller, into smaller components, I think then you guys would be a little more comfortable in answering this, right? So, how many of you have heard the word server? Let's connect to the server, or the server is down. Anyone?
Yeah, we've heard of it.
Heard of something called server, right?
Tell us a little about
someone wants to, yeah.
A common storage location for like people on network.
Okay, it could be a common storage location also. Yes. Cool. Storage location also. Yes.
A computer which
Right.
processes the user request.
Okay.
A computer which processes user requests.
Someone has said
It
a
could
remote
process
computer.
user.
I love that answer. A remote computer.
Right. But let's say that I am remote desktoping into, Lyle's computer, right? And, I want to play around. So does Lyle's computer become a server just by being a remote computer? Or is there any special attribute, Sai Akash, why don't you unmute and, try this? Is there something a little special about this, remote computer which qualifies it as a server?
Am I audible?
Allows
Sorry,
multiple
could you
clients.
repeat?
Hello.
So yeah, whoever was speaking, could you please repeat?
Yeah.
Right.
I think I would add to the remote computer thing as performing a certain task, like maybe storage or even
Storage
processing
processing, yes, it does that, but that remote part is what Lyle loved, right? Like, is there anything that you would want to add in that remote part, right, which would, qualify it as a, a server which is generally used, right? Is there something a little different about this remote computer?
It's dedicated for that purpose only.
Computer.
Okay, dedicated. The second guy. Sorry, I didn't catch your name, but you said something dedicated something. Go for it.
Yeah, it's dedicated to that, like a single purpose, and is usually not a computer that's used normally.
Cool, not very true. Like, so I have a server, I use it for, I don't know, 6 different applications maybe, right? Which houses backend to answer. Cool. Sifty, I don't know your name, but okay, close. So it does house the backend. It does. That's correct, right? So what I was looking for is really stupid, right? So usually, right, your servers, for most scalable applications which are out there, right, would be remote systems which are on the cloud, which means that they have a dedicated public IP. Okay, which again means that they are accessible to anyone who's just connected to the internet, right? If you're connected to the internet, then you can access, not directly access the machine, but access the services being provided by this machine, right? So that is usually how you qualify a system as a server, because it's available, right, through the internet. There are other servers also, right? There are applications which are very organization specific. There could be servers in that in those areas also, right? But those are not the common ones. And from the ideas that I have seen, all of you, mostly would be using the public servers only, right, which are connected to the internet, right, and are accessible to anyone who's connected to the internet. Cool. They have their dedicated IP. So you could read a little bit about, what is an IP address, right? What are dedicated IP addresses, right? How is it used in addressing? So these are cool things which, anyone who's building technology stacks today, right? Whether you're building software, whether you're building hardware, these things you should know, right? These are things you can read up on. Cool. So let me answer the question myself a little bit, right? So the server is a remote system available over the internet, or we can call it the cloud, right? Which can store, process requests, right? Store data, process requests, right? And is made available, right, to every client which wants to connect to it, right? Now moving into the second side, right? What are clients, right? Someone said that client request it will handle, right? What are the different kind of clients that would talk to the server? Someone? App, browser, cool, sure, yes. If you're doing some website, that's cool. That's going. That's also the right direction, yes. Another server could be talking.
Another
yes,
server
exactly.
could be a client.
Sensor was what I was looking for. Cool. So all of these, are interfaces, right? They are the bridge between the real world and your application, right? A sensor, a browser, right? You would think that there is nothing that can connect them, right? But they are at the core of it an interface, The sensor is an interface between, some physical parameters in your system, and the browser where the guy can see it is the interface between that human being and your system, right? All the clients are in, like high level, if you see, are interfaces by which your application talks to the real world, right? Which would be a sensor, which could be a phone app, right? Which also someone mentioned. It could be a native app also which runs on desktop. That's, I think, one which was missed, right? But a lot of you don't make them, so it's okay to miss. But for some applications, you could be using that, right? So all of these are clients, right? We would go in depth of that too, right? So I'd like to move to the next slide.
Before that, where does the server store data? Any idea about that?
Data centers.
Okay, the server is located in a data center, sure, but like how does it store data? How does it write data?
Right. What is that application that runs where the data is being pushed to, like where
that we've got in the chat databases? Srinidhi, could you unmute and tell me a little bit about our database?
A way of storing your data.
Okay, it's a way of storing the data, but any examples? Do you have any idea of what is? Can you give me an example of some?
NoSQL databases and SQL databases.
Awesome, cool. SQL. Could you do you know the difference between NoSQL and SQL?
SQL uses in the form of like tables and rows and columns, and NoSQL is in like JSON something.
You're saying that, okay, got it. You're saying SQL is kind of like an Excel way of storing data, similar to Excel, whereas NoSQL, it could be hierarchical.
Yes.
Got it. Cool. All right. So, yeah, Prashant.
Great. So, why I said move on? Because I trusted these guys. I was like, hey, if we ask them data, can't show that, like all of them would be like, our database, big deal. Come on. Cool. Only one of you answered. Weird. Good guys, sir, you can interact. Like, show off, dude. Show off if you know, like a little bit. It's okay. Cool. So coming back, right? So we understood that there are three systems, right? Mainly we are categorizing them into three systems. One is the server, which would have a backend, a database, right? And it would be running on top of a hosting service, right? Which is the server system, right? Which is basically the Linux machine usually, or in some cases, it would be the Windows Server machine, right? And they interact with the interfaces, right? Which are basically the client, which again, as you rightly said, could be web UI, mobile UI, native, which is desktop, right, UIs, or it could be sensors, actuators, the Internet of Things side, right? Which we are again broadly categorizing into two sets, which would be embedded without GUI and embedded with GUI, right? This means that they could have screens attached basically, right? Like to them, or they can do high compute tasks. We'll discuss all of these points in depth, right? So first let's start with, the first block, right? Backend, right? So I'm sure like you would have heard some names, right? Passing around. Someone mentioned MERN-Stack, right, which holds a name of a backend, right? Would you like to try and name a few backend applications? First of all, before we go there, would someone like to define a backend? Like, what is a backend? What is backend? Actually, it's very wrong. Like, it's used for other things also, right? In non-tech industry, where backend is something which people don't understand, right? It is just that he's a backend, say he'll correct it, or he'll correct it from the backend. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, in tech stacks, what would a backend mean? Something that implements a business logic. A little more specific, the code that connects UI to the database. Very specific. That's functionality and modules. Wow, that's answering it. That is brilliantly put together. Okay, something that users can't access and we use our own. So users have to access backend. That's incorrect section. So if the users can't access the backend, then what's the point of the backend? Users only interact. Managing data from user and the server. Managing data is true. There could be other aspects of it also. So all of you are, in the right lines. Okay, so a backend is basically a piece of code, right? A set of application that you build, right? Which can perform computation tasks, right? Do data storage and retrieve data when required for different applications, right? Performs all the CRUD operations, but can also do extra processing required for your application to run smoothly, right? There could be other things that the backend could be doing, right? And is responsible for data transfer across your application, right? So what are some of the examples of backends that you know of, right? Some backend applications that you know of. Not know of as in you can code in, but names that. But users can interact with backend, not access, right? Hey, they can, they interact with backend, not access as in they can't change the backend code, for sure. They can't change the code. But access is it's a tricky word. So I'm sorry, Saksham, I didn't understand it last time. I thought by access you mean, send or receive things from. So I'm sorry. Cool. So coming back to some names. Throw out some names, man. Like which backend applications.
What is the backend?
Firebase. Cool. That's the first logo we have on that slide. Django, Node.js, PHP.
Awesome.
Good going.
.NET.
Yeah.
MySQL is a database. It's not a, as was mentioned earlier, it's not a backend application. You cannot build
JavaScript is way too vague. JavaScript. There has been a better answer for JavaScript.
Language, right?
Yeah. Spring. Cool. You know them all. I don't think you missed any. I don't think they missed any. You don't need that slide now. We could skip. Let's move on to database. Right. So yeah, Express is an HTTP library for Node.js, right? So when you're saying Express, it's better to just say Node.js, right? Because that's the parent, right, of this. So to answer the guy who said JavaScript, right? So actually JavaScript is a language which was initially a client-side language only, right? But Node.js is a framework created within that language, right? That enables you to write backend too. Cool. So let's move to the slide. Let's show them a few and tell them how they can make decisions.
Right. No, I'm saying otherwise it's like saying Python can be used as a backend, right? Sure, it can, but not on its own, right? You use Django on top of Python or Flask on top of Python, where Python is just a language, but Django and Flask is the actual application that will, the framework that will allow you to build your application on the back.
Right. So see, Avni has asked a question. So can we say databases help in backend dev, right? That's not entirely true. Can we go to the previous slide? Quickly, I can just show you the data flow, right, of how data flow happens. Okay, so your backend is what your users interact with by sending requests most of the time, right? And when they send these requests, right, what happens is whatever data has to be persisted. Let's say that they logged in, they registered, or they made a to-do, right, in a to-do list application. The specifics of that data is stored in the database, right? So the database is where your backend stores that data and makes it available when the user comes on again, right? Or makes a similar request again based on some parameters, right? So you can say the database is the storage point of the backend rather than say that it helps in backend development. It does not help in backend development per se directly. There's one way of seeing it where you are saying that hey, in the code that we are writing, right, we are not storing data directly in that code, in that backend. So in that sense, yes, right, you're not actually, like, let's say you write a Java application, right? So you're not storing all the data in memory of this application, but you are storing them in some other application which is running, which is the database, right? So in that aspect, yes, it does, but that's not the complete definition, Avni. I hope I answered your question. But yeah, cool. Okay. So yeah, coming to some backend applications that are available, right? So I think you named them all except, so you said PHP, we say, you use PHP, cool, but use with some framework like Laravel. And I think someone said Django. One you missed was Flask. Flask is also amazing. It's really good for, like quickly setting up your server with minimum bloat, and it has some really performance boosting as plugins like the new Unicorn and all that. So you can look at that, right? So some of the names are Firebase, Node.js, Django, Spring and Spring, you use Spring Boot to make Spring applications. Flask and Laravel, right? These are some examples we are giving. I'm not saying use these, but these are some of the backend applications you could use, right? Everyone has its own advantages and disadvantages, right? How do you decide which backend you should use? So there are a few factors that go into play, right? Number one is how much your team is competent in a certain language, right? That's, I think, very important, right? If your team already has affinity to a certain language or a certain kind of language, let's say that, your team knows functional programming, right? Then Node.js makes sense, right? Because JS would be easy to pick. If they know object oriented, then maybe Spring, could be picked up, right? So what is the affinity to languages your team knows, right? Your core team understands, knows, or has, control over, right? So that's one. Then how many requests per second are you expecting going forward, right? Like if you want to scale, then you have to again make some decisions, right, on how how you would want to tweak your database, which plugins to use, or which database to completely ignore and not use, right? Like I wouldn't recommend a Firebase to anyone for that matter, right? And if there are millions, then maybe not Node.js and Spring, right? So these are some of the comparisons you can make, right? So this is again the second factor, right? How scalable you want that application to look like, right? Like how many, based on how many requests you are getting, right? If it's an application that at its peak also would get maybe 1,000 requests per second, or like a 10,000 requests per second, that's okay. All of these can handle that, right? But if it's something where like it's a quick trading application, right, where you're expecting every second to be very dynamic, then you need to again deep dive into these questions, right? So you have to look at the application, the specifics of what is the most complex part of your application, right? That's the second. The third part is, what are the integrations you might want to make, right? Integrations, what do I mean? Let's say you want to write AI, right? JS does not have, extremely amazing libraries. You can spawn child processes. Child processes are something that, like you call another language's code and then you return back, right? But that's not the most scalable way, right? So you might want to use a Django or a Flask server if you want to, have AI inbuilt into the backend, right? If every request ka return also has to go with some amount of analytics, right? Then maybe these two are the one for you, right? So it also matters, like, if there is something which is only available in Java, right? Some integration, then you can use Spring Boot. So Django comes with a lot of bloat, Srinidhi, to answer your question, right? Where not bloat, but features, let's say. Lyle would like to call them features. I like to call them bloat. Difference of opinion there. But Django comes with a lot of features like login user, which you can pre-configure the Django server you're setting up with, right? Whereas Flask is very, bloat-free. Just and
Skeleton
like
for
if you see,
writing REST APIs.
Yeah. Whereas Django is actually like, you can actually do the front end, like the HTML, CSS part also in Django, right? Flask would just host those pages, does not integrate really well, but has its own advantages, right? So obviously. Any other questions on this? So I know I said a lot of things and like didn't bring you
So
guys
just to
in.
tell you the languages, Firebase doesn't work on any language. It's basically a no-code option, right? Where you go to Google and you pay them something per month and they give you these basic features, and now you can. It's good for just a very, very basic prototype. It's good for a project, not for a product, right? You cannot build a startup probably based on Firebase. When it comes to Node.js, obviously it works on JavaScript. Django and Flask, as Prashant said, works on Python. So if you know Python, Django and Flask might be good for you. Spring Boot and Spring is based on Java, good old Java. And Laravel is a PHP-based framework, but you could also use PHP in like a LAMP stack with an Apache server. But PHP is, pretty outdated, and I don't think it's very recommended today.
Right. And Firebase, as like rightly mentioned, right? It's a very glorious thing when you're just starting off that, hey, I don't have to write anything, right? And I have my find, all the CRUD operations right there in functions, right? Of any client I'm using. When you start working in applications, you'll see that, right? Like Firebase has a lot of libraries for anything you will want to build, right? Whether you want to build web applications, mobile applications, right? They have a library. That library would have all the kind of commands, right? Like find, update, or the CRUD operations are create, read, update, delete, by the way. So it would have libraries which would have functions for all of this, right? That would, that's good initially to quickly set something up, show a demo to some client. But later on, they have a pricing model where if you are, going above a certain number of requests, you'll have to pay. Whereas for other things, you can set up your own server and, it would be really cheap, right, if you want to scale. So we don't recommend. Right. And if you want to run some logic, right, some complex logic before returning, right, then again, you have to do it client side, which is not recommended. Right. Yeah. You shouldn't, you wouldn't want to do that.
So you had a huge database and you wanted to do a complex search on that, you'd probably have to download the full database onto the client and run the search within the client, like within the mobile app, right? Making it very slow. So yeah. Cool. Any other questions on backend database, or you want to move on?
No, I think there are a few. So first of all, Facebook is using PHP still. Yes, they are. But did you start in 2000? I don't know when. Like Facebook started pretty early. I think. Would you, you should not take that as a motivation. Yeah, model would be a good option. That is more of a client side integration you're talking about, Azam. Right, my team is fluent with Python. Cool. So I mean, if you're talking about server side, you can directly use TensorFlow library, right? TF-Lite is more on, if you want to do it on client side, run your application on, like run some quick analytics on the client side. So that's the two different things. Cool. Any other questions?
Doesn't look like.
You can unmute and ask also. You don't have time. Okay. Okay. So the next question is the database, right? So again, I'll just repeat so it drills down. Hey, I want to decrypt when you send a request rather than client side. So then you use TensorFlow. No, TF-Lite is for on device. That library is made for on device. You use TensorFlow or PyTorch, right? If you want to respond, like do it on server side and respond with it. You use TensorFlow library or PyTorch library directly. You don't need TF-Lite. That was tweaked TensorFlow for client or on device. If you read the definition of TF-Lite, I think they say that this is for on device or client. I don't remember which one. Sorry, coming back. Database, right? So yeah, again, revising what I just said, right? The backend is where all the logic is, right? On what happens, like when someone reaches us with something, and the users reach this backend, right? But where is that data stored after the logic is applied? That's stored in the database, right? So all the backend applications would talk to database applications, right? Databases are also nothing but applications only, right? Which have a very quick interface again for the backend to query data, right? Now that query could mean anything through the CRUD lifecycle, right? It could create, read, update, delete data, right? In the database, but that is done from the backend, right? Your applications don't directly talk to the database, right? Like your front end, right? They would talk to the backend. The backend would apply some amount of logic to it, check for the user, maybe like add another parameter based on where the request is coming from, and then query from the database, right? Which is another application which has a great indexing thing running for it, right? An indexing engine. What is an indexing engine? It's a way where they store data in a way where it could be queried much faster, right? Then again, some compression algorithms running, so you don't have a bloated data set. Like if you're storing a lot of data, also it shouldn't bloat. So it does all of that, right? It actually encapsulates your data pretty well. So that's why we use databases. Now let's go to the database slide and discuss different words. So before we go there, actually, could you name some databases? Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot that, Lyle. So
I think we've already got MySQL in the chat.
Yeah, SQL, MongoDB, PostgreSQL, cool. We have some more. Come on, try one or two more, and you'll have covered everything we have. SQLite is client side. SQLite is usually used client side. So you have to understand, right? There are some things that are created. Redis, yes, that's the one we have for yes. MariaDB we didn't put. Like it's not even as performant as Postgres. So like I thought why CouchDB again. Didn't see the point, but cool. I mean, for your specific application, I don't know for what exactly MariaDB you would use, like why it would differentiate. If you can, Aviral, talk about it a little after I'm done with these, that would be great, right? So I can talk about the few which we have on the slide right now, right? Postgres, I think is hands down CockroachDB. Tanu, so I am coming back to you on that. So yeah, PostgreSQL is an open source MIT licensed, really awesome DB, right? Which has a lot of plugin integrations possible, right? So you can modify Postgres to suit your application's needs, right? So that's one of the best features I love about Postgres. And it's a SQL database. So there are two kinds of databases, right? SQL and NoSQL, which I think we already discussed, right? Where SQL databases are basically stored in a tabular format, right, which is Excel sheet like, and NoSQL databases are stored in a hierarchical format, right, which usually looks like a JSON, right, where you have a parent and then the child could be any form of data, right? It could be again an array or some sort of object also, right, which has a lot of data points inside it, right? So that's the difference NoSQL databases have. That's the difference between SQL and NoSQL. And under SQL databases, Postgres is one of the most promising one coming forward today, right? MySQL is the most commonly used and taught one. So a lot of your team, Cassandra is great. Cassandra I miss. I'm sorry, Cassandra is actually pretty great. So yeah, MySQL is the one which is most taught and a lot of people already know and are familiar with, right? Postgres are similar commands to MySQL. So it's not like there's a big learning curve for managing a Postgres. But yeah, there are some differences. And MySQL, I only wrote because a lot of you would be comfortable already, right? If you're coming from CS background, right? One more I wanted to call out in the SQL world was Timescale DB. And I think it makes a lot of sense to use it for time series data, right? It even beat Cassandra in the time series test for insertion and read, right? At least in 20. This year I haven't seen. So time series data, right? What is time series data? So if you have IoT applications, right? Maybe every second you are sending a request, updating data for your light or some parameter or some sensor value, right? Maybe that is the need, right? And there could be thousands of devices sending this one data point every second, right? So when you have these time series data where quick insertions have to be made, so Timescale DB is a great DB for that. It's a plugin on top of PostgreSQL, but it has amazing indexing, right? So what are the decision-making parameters here in SQL databases when you want to make the insertion times, right, and the read times, right? So you have to see what would happen more in your application, and then you can decide, right? Coming to NoSQL databases, MongoDB and Redis are the most commonly used ones. Actually, MongoDB is good enough. 80% of the people I know who use NoSQL maybe use MongoDB, right? And there are other distros, but I think MongoDB is the most reliable one. It is so popular. It has access control and all, which is pretty great. Which means that you can have certain users only access certain data points, right? There is a lot of stuff done for security in MongoDB, which is great, right? So when you use SQL and NoSQL, first let's take an example for that, right? When you have a very, very predictable data which does not cascade, where there is very less hierarchy. I'll give you an example of that too. Then SQL is great, right? Let's say that if I want to store the temperature of a certain place, right, for 2 years, I can easily do that in a SQL database because I know I need a timestamp, the location maybe, and a temperature, right? There is nothing happening hierarchically in this, right? But let's say that I am building a social media platform where every comment I make could have a like, right? Could have a comment of its own, which could again have a like, right? You're seeing how the hierarchies are building here, right? So when you want to build applications like that, I would suggest use a NoSQL database, right? It simplifies hierarchical data sets. And some other advantages of NoSQL databases are that you don't have to be restrictive, that, hey, these are the kind of data I want to store. As your application goes forward, right, you can keep, bridging, branching out the DB, right, adding more stuff to it, which enables newer users to access some features, older users to add if they want, those features, which is kind of not very easy with SQL databases. Right. So the decision making parameter for SQL, NoSQL is how much hierarchy is coming into your database. Right. How do you do that? You define all your features, see how those features could be stored. Right. Like how those features could be represented if you want to, like store them on a sheet of paper. You can write it on a piece of paper also. Right. That this represents one node of my data. Right. Or one node of interaction. So how is it looking, like a 4 rows, like a 4 column thing, or, is it going deep, right? Are there things that have nested information? So those are the things you can use for SQL, NoSQL. Between DBs, right, for SQL, NoSQL, read times, write times, library, integration possibility with backend, right? All of them have libraries which make integrations possible with backend. Right, but again, availability. If you are choosing some really posh backend, which is really new, maybe it might not have libraries for Redis or have library for MongoDB. Right, then you should read all of that. Right, whether all of this would be possible or not. Right, and create kind of a sheet where you mention all of this, right, and how they would interact. So I have given some points. So Aviral, could you start with, why, MariaDB, right? What are some of the advantages of MariaDB?
I'm not particularly using MariaDB, but the thing is that it is free and open source, and also it's very lightweight as compared to Postgres. It's very lightweight and efficient, I believe.
Okay. Okay. So lightweight and efficient in terms of its memory footprint or its compute footprint?
The memory footprint.
Okay, great. Okay. So these two things, right? Like for MongoDB and Redis, if you see, so the memory footprint for Mongo is a little lesser, but the compute footprint, right? Mongo is sometimes limited if you have crazy amounts of aggregation algorithms, right, running, whereas Redis outperforms Mongo on that. So what would happen here is, like, let's say you're building a game, right, which involves some complex logic where you want to do it on the DB, right? So there, if there is like a lot of computation, Redis might outperform MongoDB. But if you want to store just high volumes of data, then MongoDB is best, right? So I think what Avril is saying is that, if you want to store high volumes of data, MariaDB might be a good choice. Okay. So CouchDB and CockroachDB, guys, you want to, pitch in? Why would you choose these? Any one of you guys, Kishore, Tanu, Daral, right? So why would you choose one of these DBs? Like, what are some of the advantages, maybe?
Yeah, it kind of it helps to have your data on different places, and it's for real time, I guess. I'm not
Okay,
sure.
so you're saying that it has a distributed storage mechanism?
Yeah, it is very good when it comes to a distributed database.
Okay. So what do you mean by distributed, right? So if you, in today's world, if you read about containers, Kubernetes, there are a lot of things happening for, making applications and systems distributed, right? The advantage it gives you is that there is very high availability. There is a concept called HA, or high availability, right? Which you want for every application you want to build, right? You never want your application to be down. Right, whereas no one has seen the future, right? No one knows, when the server would go down, when a certain node would become unavailable, right? So in those cases, having a distributed system helps a lot, right? It makes sure that system is always up, right? So for that, I think it makes sense. Cool. Okay, let's move on to the next node. Right. Right. So now we come to the client side, right? Now we discuss about the interfaces that we talked about initially, right? So your backend and your database, right? They are interacting, they are storing data. There are different mechanisms by which you are reaching out to the backend, right? Telling it to store data or telling it to retrieve data, delete data, whatever, right? But where is all this happening, right? As a user, you don't necessarily make requests to the backend yourself, right? By typing in some commands or doing anything like that, right? You would do what? What do you usually do, right? As a client, can anyone say, for interacting with the backend?
Hey, sorry,
The
I think
most
we
common
skipped hosting
operation.
service. Do you want to go into that, or we'll keep it for the end in case anyone has it, because it's pretty common knowledge. I
Yeah,
think.
we'll discuss it later. We'll discuss.
Cool.
I think. Yeah, tell me. So what is the, like how would you, as a user, right? What is the most common operation a user does to, interact with the backend? Most common operation. Login, okay. Fair enough. Okay, let's not talk about filler form. Click on buttons. That's what I was looking for. Yes. Download something is also cool. But I think clicking on buttons, right? That's the most common thing you'll ever do, right? And every time you click a button, right? Like majority of the times when you're clicking a button, right? And something is changing, right? For permanently changing, right? Let's say save button on the form, or a download button on a page where you're downloading something, or a login button on a login page, right? All this time, right? This is how you're triggering an interaction with the backend, right? Which would in turn check with the database or update the database, right? To enable the next step. Okay. So in terms of this, right? So UIs, right? So there are three different demarcations we have made. We'll start with web UI. Okay, so what are some of the frameworks that you know for web, for web front end? React, most popular, yes. Pretty amazing. Vue, yes. Angular, perfect. Yeah, that's what we have. And the the parent of all of it, right, is the vanilla HTML, CSS, JavaScript, framework, right, which you can also use but not recommended today, right? So you should use one of these frameworks. Okay, so can we go to the slide? Like web UI. Yeah. So React, Angular, Vue, right? These are some of the most popular JavaScript frameworks that exist today. Right? They come with a bunch of features for development and for deployment, right? And have different ideologies behind them, right? Like in React, in a single file, you'll be able to define all your functions and your layout, right? Whereas in Angular, you would have one where you're defining functionality and one file where you're right? But all these three, right, definitely rely on good old HTML, CSS, right, which to design and to make sure the browser understands how the application would look at the end, right? The look and feel is controlled by HTML, CSS or its variant, right? Like in React, you have something called JSX, right? In Angular, you are just using HTML with some Angular commands, right? And Vue is also similar. So all of this is based on that. So you need someone in your team who knows HTML, CSS for sure. After that, it's a choice you can make, right? What are some of the bases for the choices you can make, right? Between the front ends. So between the front ends, the choices could be based on, like all of these are scalable, right? There is no problem in, handling quick data, handling large data, right? But something for Angular versus React could be that, Angular is by default TypeScript, right? So if you work or plan to have a lot of people in your team who are very new, right? I would say that new people should be given a TypeScript, I think it's better if they work in TypeScript because a lot of errors are avoided for them, right? If you have senior developers, again, TypeScript makes sense, like for a bigger team, right? Because a lot of things you would want to standardize, right? Not in your case, right? But for most of your applications, I would say, just go with React. It's really simple. You can move it to TypeScript. There is no issues in that, right? And I personally prefer React over the other two. right? But you can do your research, right? Do your research and you can choose one. Like all three, you cannot go wrong with choosing either of these. They have their own advantages and disadvantages, right? Choose any one of them. For small teams where you're just starting off with dev, right? I think React is really easy to learn. It has a lower learning curve than both Angular and Vue. Cool.
All right.
It's not like web UI is pretty, like saturated. There are only three simple things you can use. Yeah, coming to mobile, right? Like, so applications, basically Android, iOS applications, right? What are some of the platforms you know already that help in this? Android Studio is an IDE, but helps. Flutter, right? This is a framework. Yes. Yeah. Go for it, guys. Swift, iOS. Yes, that's correct. Native Kotlin, yeah, is a language again, which is, yes, but cool. Yes, Kotlin is used for Android development. Other. For the noise. Cool. Anyone else? How many of you have built an Android or an iOS app till now? Have built any app till now? Yeah, you built a car, great. Anyone else who has built an app till now? Okay. So, Aditya, what was the app about? Could you just talk a little bit about what the app did? And what did you use to make this app?
So it was a basic app like for PMI and connecting with those data of the new generation, which implements the male and female ratio over the body index. So it was based on Flutter, sir. And according to
Perfect.
like different like regions of the continents, like the PMI scale differs like a bit. So I was taking some data from the Firebase. That's all.
Right. Americans are a little lenient about fat. So I guess, yeah, cool. That's awesome. Okay. A timer app with Hans Zimmer. Whoa, man, great. That's pretty awesome, Kishore. Really appreciate it. Could you send me the APK or something? What did you use, Kishore? What platform did you use to make this framework?
Just Android Studio.
Android Studio. So Java or
Java,
Kotlin?
yeah, Java.
Java. Great, man. Just send me the APK, man. This is, or put it on the group. You can't paste it on Play Store, I think, because there would be copyright issues. But nice idea. Really nice idea. Shubhakanta, would you like to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, mine was just like a basic beginner level app. I was just trying out, but not that. I don't have that hang of Kotlin. I'm more into machine learning side of things.
Okay, so you use Kotlin for building your app, right?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So let's go to the mobile UI slide. Right, guys. So see, some of the platforms we acknowledge that Java and Kotlin exist for Android development and Swift exists for iOS development, right? Hence they are written there. But for smaller teams, right, we usually do not recommend going with these platforms, right? Why we don't is because, we are kind of afraid of, putting a lot of pressure on the teams, right? So today, see, iOS users are increasing, right? Like there are so many people who are using iOS devices also, right? And in India too, right? Which would be probably your first market, right? So what is the problem with developing in Java or Kotlin? Akash, could you, like you developed in Kotlin, you said, right? So could you tell me one problem that you faced?
Yeah, so the problem is that the app works in iOS.
Your voice became really low for me. Is it just me or?
No, that happened. Me as well.
Sure. Yeah, Akash, a little louder, maybe.
Hello, sir. Is
Great.
it clear now?
Great. Yeah, I can hear it now. Yes, go for it.
So, sir, I made in Java actually, but the problem is obviously
Okay.
for iOS, either I need to make a different one or choose Flutter.
Right. So see, that is right. he has found out the problem. The problem is you have to develop everything from scratch. Right. You are not able to use even a bit of the code, right, to do anything on the other platform. Right. If you learn Swift, you build the perfect app, right, for iOS. Even then you'll have to learn from scratch Java or have another team, right? So to keep teams, like you must have heard about the lean startup model, right? Which is really important. When you're starting off, you don't want a lot of bloat, right? You want very quick development, things getting done fast, right? And moving as soon as possible, right? So for that, there are very good platforms, right? Which like, and two of the best are React Native and Flutter. There are others also. There's Xamarin and all of that. But we suggest one of these two platforms, right? So React Native is based again on a little bit on the React framework, which we discussed for web, but it gives you Android and iOS apps at the end of it, right? So it kind of runs a browser on your phone. Not exactly, this is not exactly what it does, but it kind of runs a fork of a browser on your phone and then runs some amount of, like the UI which you have written, right, which can interact with APIs and do all the stuff, right? And this browser of sorts that I talked about, it has different features and integrations that has been done, right? So it can talk to the camera, it can talk to the sensors, right? It has access. It would work close to like a app on your phone, right? There are still some things which are not as smooth, right? The processing is not that great, right? It's not as fast, right? If you want to do something which is very UI heavy, you want really, really high fidelity, 120 FPS animations or something, right? Native is not for you. But if let's say you are building a COVID tracker, right, or a talk calculator for robots, right, it's just taking some data, processing it, and showing that data, right? React Native shines. It's really amazing there, right? If you want to display data, use React Native. Don't think twice. If you want really high fidelity, high performance applications, right, where there's a lot of smooth graphics and all of that, then use Flutter, right? These are the parameters you can think of. React Native, again, one more thing we can think of is what is the language affinity you have. If you are into object-oriented programming, then again Flutter makes sense because it uses Dart, which again uses objects, so you have your class and all, right? If you are into functional programming, React Native is an easier choice, right? But it's not hard to learn either. Both of them have a pretty low learning curve, and Flutter especially. I think Flutter is really easy to learn, right? Like you can learn it very quickly. So these are some of the suggestions that we have. Okay, come on, Lyle, we can go back to native UI, right? This is basically desktop. So let's say you're building something for Windows, Mac, and Linux, right? What are some of the platforms that you know of already? Flutter is scalable, yes, Shubhakanta. So, there are, so you have to use the right frameworks with Flutter, right? If you're using Flutter and writing everything in one Dart file, right? Obviously, it's not scalable, right? So but now you have a good, model view separation in Flutter also, right? With libraries like Block, BLOC, you can check that out, right? Which makes Flutter really scalable. So don't see the challenge in Flutter. For native UIs, desktop UIs, and web UIs, not so much today. There are still some gaps to be filled. But for Android and iOS apps, yes, it's completely scalable. One more advantage it gives you is that you can write your own channels in Flutter, which means that you can write native code. You can write Android and iOS specific code also, right? Wherever required, wherever you think there is no library available, how do I do this integration? You can write a code for that, right? Specifically, on the Android side or on the iOS side, right? There is there are those folders there which you can edit and you can make changes to. A lot of Flutter developers don't do that, but that's possible, right? Which makes it very scalable. Any other doubts actually on the mobile UI or whatever we have discussed till now? Any other doubts? So let's do those before we move forward. Otherwise you forget. By the end I'm asking any doubts like information overload. अब तो सब भूल गए. बहुत doubt है.
Sir, I had two questions actually. So, for a
Okay.
listing or e-commerce type of app, where there is
Right.
a lot of user data, but mostly it's like restaurants and all. So, would you recommend going with Flutter or React Native, or both will be fine?
Both would do. If you want to, again in this, right, build a lot of animations or things like that, right, then maybe Flutter has a little bit of an edge. But in this case, you know, like they are pretty much both stacked very closely. And what should be your decision-making point, right, is what is your team comfortable in? Is object-oriented programming their forte or is functional programming their forte, right? Like that is the difference between these two that you should be looking at.
Understood, sir. So one more thing, sir, what I have found out is that most startups, as you also mentioned, prefer like in NoSQL databases, prefer MongoDB. But if we are going looking for an app like mobile app, Android or iOS, I think Firebase, like as you also said, Firebase is mostly no code type. So everything is as smooth. Like Firebase offers Crashlytics, cloud messaging, and like all the normal database functions. And you need there are generous limits, but you need to pay after a certain time. And if you want to
Right.
use cloud functions for server side, then you again need to pay. So actually, my question
Right.
is, sir, is the cost the main difference? If like when
No.
scaling up, the problem is the cost.
Right. Right. No, that's not the case. That's not. So I also said one more thing, right? That server side logic is very hard to implement when you are using Firebase. Okay. So what happens? What do I mean by that? Let me tell you that, right? Let's say that you have a simple filter, right? Ki everyone above age 20 send me. Cool. Then cool. Right. But for some reason, now I am not that creative. I'm not coming up with a good example. I want to check everyone half of a certain age plus some variable, right? If I want to do some calculation and operation like that, right? Then Firebase fails. You have to get all the data set, right? Which would be for a very wide, query, right? And then filter that down on your client, which means on your app or on your device, right? Wherever that data is coming, you have to filter there, right? Which is not great, right? Like, which is not not a good thing. It hampers performance.
So basically range querying
Right.
and stuff, like if I want longitude, latitudes in a range, something like that.
Right, these are, like, so Mongo has a geo location tagging, like geo search also, right? Where you can give it 2 coordinates and it can actually do coordinate search also, right? Those are examples, but there are much more, many more things coming in logic, right? Let's say if you want to build something which, grows over time, right? Where your server stores some data, sees some requests, right? And then there's some analytics we are doing based on which things are changing. So again,
Okay, sir,
for
understood.
that
So
you can't
basically
use
it's not
Firebase.
about cost.
Right. Yeah. So
Understood, sir. So mainly it's about control.
Yeah, it's about functionality also. It's not about cost. If again you have decided that hey, it's a very simple app, I just want to show the number of patients every day, right, for a hospital. There is nothing else I would want to do ever, right? If you make those kind of very strong decisions, which every startup is recommended not to, right? You should not be very stubborn in the beginning, and stubborn startups are not not scalable usually, right? But if you are stubborn, if you want to be like, nahi, I would only do this, right? Then Firebase may make sense, may make some sense, right? Otherwise, it's better if you do your own backend. Again, comparing only MongoDB to Firebase is also not correct. I am just correcting that for the other people so they won't get confused. Because Firebase, yes, the Firestore part of it stores data, right? But it is also, it's basically database and DB combined, right? Where you can actually query and all also, right? For that, if you want to do on your own thing, right, you won't do it just with MongoDB. You would also have a backend application, right, which would be talking to MongoDB. So just wanted to clarify that small point.
Okay. Sir, and one more thing, sir. Will it be okay to go with a serverless option? Basically, but again, like the most of the code will be running on the client side, most of the logics.
Right. Depends on your application, I would say, right? Like, what is your application? Would you be okay with the performance impact that might have, right?
Okay, sir.
And as like, would the data grow, right? Because see, performance impact is very easily like I can pass that, yeah. But you would say, nahi, mere mein to nahi hoga performance impact, right? But then the argument would be, let's say that if there are tens or hundreds of something, right? No performance impact. But what if there are millions of data points that the client has to now process? Right? Obviously, there would be a performance delay, right? Like, there would be a performance impact.
Yes,
So
sir.
those are some of the key factors, right, which you have to see. So in this, we can discuss in one-to-one. You do your research also before that, but again, this is very specific to one particular application.
Certainly, sir. Thank
One
you.
more thing, I think you all are jumping to stack selection between web and within web and within mobile, but I think little more thought has to go into the choice between web and mobile as well, right? Do we need an app? Do we need a web UI, or do we need both? Depending on who your user is and what your user prefers, right?
Yes, I understood, sir. Sir, also, sir, one more option, like it's more general if you want to discuss that, will it be a case idea to go with a website and for apps use like in Android, WebView is offered like in Android Studio. So rather use WebView, or similarly, as you explained, that use some other
Right.
frameworks to convert into an app.
Right. You started with e-commerce. I would never say no to WebView for guys who are doing e-commerce. It's very simple, just to try out things. But again, as you build on functionality, as you have more things, then I would say that you would want to create a nice experience also, right? Like if you are someone like Amazon, for example, right, where the experience is not in the app only and in the warehousing mechanism you have, and all the logic that you have built. Then again, cool, sure, like you can just have a web view. But for newer ventures, right, I think the experience matters a lot, right? So initially, cool, go with web view, but do keep in your mind that you might want to enhance it all, is my recommendation.
Understood, sir. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, so regarding teams which employ both hardware and software, yeah, guys, we would help you completely do it to make your fully running prototype. You don't have to do simulations if it's something that's not very complicated. This is again a very specific question, right? So when we come to hardware, maybe we can discuss, right? And Kushal, which one would you suggest for a social media app? Right. So which one of what? Web UI, mobile UI, database, backend? Mobile UI for social media, again, both React Native, and your this thing, Flutter could do the job for you, right? It depends on animations and your program affinity, like the coding affinity that you might have, right? So I'll give you an example where I'll not recommend React Native. For example, is where you are building a high fidelity game where a lot of these animations are happening. Would never recommend React Native. Go with Flutter, right? For most cases, Flutter and React Native cut it close. Then again, it comes to which language your team knows better, right? Like for these simple applications. So I think that both are good enough. Check the language for this particular application for social media. Cool. Coming to native, right? So let's talk about this. You understand, right? Desktop, maybe there are apps now. So do you know any platforms that help you build this? Has anyone built, first of all, and let's do a show of hands, has anyone built for Mac, Windows, Linux? And I'm not talking about C++ applications, okay, where you have to do CLI. I'm talking about proper GUI applications. CLI doesn't count. Anyone? You can say no, never heard of it. Using Spring, okay. Java you have used, okay. Yeah. Okay, maybe. Right. Desktop applications as in like proper, GUI applications. Who all?
Like a
Not
.exe
many. Okay,
you
let
launch,
us show them the option. Yeah, let them so yeah, we can help you here. Some of the platforms you can use. If you build a React, Angular, Vue, any of these websites, very quickly in about 2 days you can have a application running on all 3 platforms, Mac, Linux, and Windows, using Electron.js. Right, very easy to convert any of your general web apps into native apps. I'm not talking about PWAs here, right? There are some things called progressive web apps, right? Which is something else. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about native apps, right? Download, you can DMG, exe, you can install and it would work, right? So that is Electron.js. Do look at it. It's beautiful. It's so easy to use, right? Flutter also is now supporting native. It's not very scalable today, right? But it's still something that really works okay, right? It works pretty decently. So that's again something. Java, old, but still very scalable. A lot of people use it, right? You could use Java, right? Qt with Python by PyQt, C++ also the library is there. So these are some of the, like a little traditional looking UI components would be there. But you can build really robust apps, right? For sure. Processing is basically the Arduino.
Form heavy. Hey, sorry. No, I was saying Java and Qt probably for very form heavy UIs. Something like very old Windows 2000 looking applications, not modern apps.
Right, but you want someone to just fill or give you some data or something like that. So then you can use Java or Qt, right?
Stuff,
Yeah. Processing has a lot of cool features. You can do a lot of 3D stuff, right? Graphics you can do very simply by adding very small code. It's not the most scalable, I would say, application building platform, but for quick prototypes, right? For native applications, I don't think there's anything better than just quickly hooking up a processing app, right? And Lyle has used it extensively. Lyle, so would you like to talk a little bit about processing?
Yeah, I mean it's like it's a toolkit essentially, and it allows you to write code in Java, and I think Python as well. But it basically provides a lot of very heavy libraries where you can call like 5 to 6 lines and make something work. Very few lines of code, extremely easy, easier than Arduino. And you can get an app running on you can get an APK exported, or you can get an EXE exported, and Mac as well. In like 24 hours, you can build an app, right? So it's pretty good. But not as a product. You would not build a product over this. This is something you would use to prototype something, to test something, to see how it feels in someone's hands. It's not something that you'd build your business based on.
Exactly. So you could use processing, but not for products, right? Like, so for products, Electron.js or .NET Core, right, are the two I would suggest for building, high fidelity, good UI, good looking apps, right? Flutter, not today. You could, maybe again do prototyping or hope it becomes better in the next few years. And Java and Qt, as Lyle said, right, like very old form looking applications, right, where you want to just do some data collection or show some data in a very oldish UI, right? If you are making for government, maybe an app, right? You go ahead and use Java or Qt.
Yeah,
they would feel very home, very at home if you use these. Cool. So some desktop applications, a lot of you don't need this, but we still wanted to put it there. We'll share the slides also, right, so that you can keep this as a reference. And again, don't be limited to whatever we are saying, right? We are saying some of the things that we love, right? What we are trying to say is that there are so many things available. Take this as baseline and do your own research and select your stack, right? And we are giving you some things which you can consider while you are making these decisions, right? Hopefully better when you are asking questions, but we are trying our best to do it from our brains also. Okay, bro. So Lyle, is there some UI stuff also, or we directly jump to hardware?
No, I think that's about it. Is there anything else? There was the hosting part where, all of your backend and databases hosted on, either AWS or DigitalOcean. So since you're on the project track, we recommend DigitalOcean, and you can, when you're ready to host your app, let us know. We'll get you a DigitalOcean box.
Right. So
Cool.
basically what they give you is all of these hosting services, right? They would give you a private system, which would be nothing but a Linux system running with a IP, which is accessible from around the world. Right? It is a public IP where you can run your application and then that would be accessible. How does it convert to the name, right? Like let's say you would want to have your company.in or .com, right? So you would be buying a domain name and pointing that domain to this IP. I heard an echo, but okay, cool. So we will help you set up all that. You can reach out to me. I can get you sorted for that. And one more point I just wanted to make. I don't think it's covered in the slide. High fidelity user interfaces could be created using Figma, Adobe XD. Some people use Sketch. I have a friend who does, so I just wanted to say that. But usually you use Figma or Adobe XD. Do Google these really easy UI frameworks, UI platforms where you can, create high fidelity UIs pretty easily, right? And before you build your app, right, these are important. Don't start building apps or the front end of the app, right, without having a UI there, right? UI really acts as an anchor for your entire team to talk and actually build that app. Cool. Over to you, Lyle.
I thought I heard someone unmute. I think they were trying to ask a question. Tarun, is that you? Probably not. Okay. Cool. Okay, let's move on then to embedded hardware with
Like
GUI
any
and without
software
GUI.
questions, yeah, I think it's a great idea. So like I'm so now it would be more hardware. So if there are any sort of software questions, we could close them. Feel free.
Just unmute and ask. No issues, guys. Anything you might have been confused about. Unmute and say, yes, I know this also, we can move on. Like, give us some. Okay.
Yes, it's clear.
Okay, cool.
Sir, one question.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, so basically, since like Firebase is not good enough for scalability right now, but since we're still at the prototype stage, it's alright if we go ahead with Firebase and maybe further onwards change it.
See, migration.
Okay, go.
Go first.
You answer first.
Okay.
I'll answer after.
Okay. So, so you're saying that you are ready to make a migration in your app, right? From Firebase to whatever server you choose later, right?
Yes, maybe to Flask or basically.
Right. So see, there is a concept of technical debt, right? Do you know what technical debt is?
No, sir.
Okay, so just give me 1 sec. Let me Google it and read it out. Okay, so I don't. It's a fairly simple concept. If you hear these words together, actually, right? Technical debt. So what does it? What do you think it means? Just try to put those two words together and give an answer.
Well, probably a setback technically somewhere.
Okay, so basically,
yeah.
Go for it. Sorry, go for it.
Yeah, no, so see, when you incur a cost, see, everything that you do, that you build, there is a cost that you incur in time, in money, whatever it is, right? And those are equal quite often. So you incur this cost to build something, right? And the purpose of incurring the cost is to build it as an asset, right? That's very important, that everything you build is supposed to be like a one-time thing that I've invested in, and now it's going to be there for me to make money, right? But then when you realize that 4 months down the line or 6 months down the line, I need to completely rebuild it from scratch, you have actually, in a way, wasted the previous money that you've built, right? Where you have built it. All that money is, completely wasted. And in a way, you're in debt against that, right? This is a new cost that because you have not made a decision in time, you have borrowed money in a sense, right? At that time, which now you have to pay back. You need to continue to develop something that will actually work here and serve your purpose, causing you to reinvest that amount. Am I making sense?
Yes, sir, makes sense. But again, like specific to Firebase services are subscription based, right?
So what I was going to say, I was going to ask you a question, which is, where are you in terms of your customer? Can you tell me who is your customer? Have they, what is their relationship with you right now? Are you like on the verge of making a deal with them or something where they're looking to see something tomorrow and they're going to give you money?
No. It's going to take time. Yeah.
See, if you're not sure and you're building for the future of your app, right? Then it makes sense. If you have a customer right there in front of you saying, "Show me this, and you have my money. I'm going to order 20 pieces from you. I'm going to order a 1-year subscription from you," or something like that. Then show this to them as a prototype, right? Say, okay, I'm going to show you something in a week, and then after that, in 2 months or in 3 months, I'm going to show you something which is actually going to do the job. Right, and based on this, I want you to, fund me or give me a pre-order so that now I can go and build this thing out for you. If you're in that position, I would recommend using Firebase because it will quickly get your app working and in their hands to test, to use, to see if it adds value. And once the value of your entire business is validated, then you toss Firebase and you get your, get your own backend server, own everything, and not just about the cost and scalability. Like I think as a startup, you want ownership over something like data. I don't know, but I would think that you'd want to own your users' data yourself and not have somebody else own that for you.
Right, sir. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so we are in that situation right now. So that was kind of the reason why I asked this question. To test it out and to actually go and show it to doctors, not to sell it to like we're making a device and an app, a medical device. So for the app, patient data is going to be stored on in the backend. So initially, right now, just to show it as an example, if we can use Firebase, because we've already started setting up Firebase and we've already started integrations in that. So
I mean, if you have a customer ready and waiting, I would say use Firebase. You can, sure. I mean, if you've already started, then see, it shouldn't take too long, right? It's something which is, the documentation is really, really, extensive, and you can easily integrate something like Firebase. So use it for the core goal of, showing it to your customer within 1 week. If you're going to use Firebase, have that like 1 week deadline that, okay, I'm going to build my app in 1 week and show it to my customer in 1 week. And based on that, I'm going to take these learnings and go now make a proper web server, which I will own and which I will use from here on.
Okay, sir. Makes sense. Thank you.
Cool. Anything else on UI side, backend side, front end, backend? Are these concepts clear today? I hope everyone, no one, 45 people here. I hope none of you all are confused in front end and backend. Everything is thorough. Anyone with any doubts, we're happy to answer. Okay.
Hi, sir. I have one doubt.
Yeah.
Currently, we are using some like framework for for front end, like just like a Bootstrap. It's extension of some Bootstrap, and we are using that as our front end. So would it be a problem in for next after 2 or 4
No,
like any proposal?
No. So Bootstrap is a pretty decent, set of CSS components or a CSS library, right, which you can use. It's decent enough. There are some, modern CSS libraries also like, Tailwind and all, which are a little lighter. So they increase the load time a bit, and has their own advantages. But Bootstrap is pretty solid, so don't worry about it. You can keep using it.
Not exactly Bootstrap, but we are using some Falcon. Like some developer made this, and they are there to sale. We just extracted and used. Like everything is like
I
Bootstrap.
don't.
everything is like a bootstrap. They have some already made component. You need to just grab that code and use that to make like to save time.
Then you should see if you're using someone else's fork, right, which has not been extensively tested. Then that's something that becomes kind of a challenge because you don't know how has the browser testing been done on that and all, right? So just message on the group whatever you are using, right, like the Git for that or something, and I can look at the documentation. So how you should look at it is look at the documentation, how extensive the documentation is, look at the testing they have done,
Documentation
right? How
says
extensive is the browser support?
its documentation says like it's tested for all kind of browser and
Right, no, then fair enough, right? So these are some of the the considerations that you might have, right? Like are the browser support clearly chalked out, mentioned, and how extensive those look. If it says all, then you look at the versions, and again you have to also see who's your target, right? If your target is something which is going to be using updated technology only, right? Then that's cool. Then you can use something which is new and not been tested. But again, these some decision making pointers, and again the size of it, right? How bloaty it has become. If it is 1 MB, that's just that CSS or something like that, right? Or like if it's heavy, then you might want to avoid it, and you want to target people in low internet areas also. Right? Then you might want to avoid this, right? If it's heavy and you want to target people who have good internet connections, then you might still want to use it. So you can also look at how heavy it is. Usually they are not, but it's again a consideration you can have.
okay.
Cool, guys. So I think we'll move on to the hardware thing now that in the interest of time. So cool. Can I just get a quick thing on the chat? How many of y'all are hardware teams?
So it's on top. If you can like
I'm looking.
they
Yeah.
mentioned hardware software.
Hardware and software. Okay, a few of them.
And you don't need to say hardware and software. See, we understand some amount of software will be there. It's okay. Like hardware means there's some hardware at least. It qualifies as hardware.
Cool. All right, cool. So, okay, the main reason that they're broken up into with GUI and without GUI is essentially the two categories of kind of compute power you're looking at, right? Some embedded devices that are very small, very efficient. They don't usually have a screen, which is why I put it there, but it's not a hard thing having or not having a GUI. It's mostly on compute, right? So, could some of y'all give me some of the use cases of IoT? Could one of y'all at least there are 4 hardware teams? Can you unmute and just tell me what the use cases, the main benefits of IoT are?
Connectivity with like whatever device wherever you want.
Connectivity. No one else? Okay, well, the way I look at it is it's one way to interact with the real world. Like Prashant said, these UIs are the real world, but it's mostly to interact with the human, right? Whereas sensors and actuators is, how it interacts with the actual real world. So mostly IoT does 4 things, right? It needs to sense something, automate some manual process. Yes, why? Why can it automate? Because it can function in the real world, right? A physical manual process, it can automate. So you have sensors and you have actuators, right? When you have these two, you can put logic in and then you can make it. That's when compute comes in. You can add like advanced logic as well, and then you can actuate something internally. And as well, you can connect. You can connect to other devices, similar to it, or you could connect to a cloud and send that data back and get instructions from the cloud as well, right? So let's just talk about embedded hardware with GUI, right? If I needed to build an embedded system which had high compute power, it probably had some sensors, some actuators maybe, and obviously networking. Any idea what device we would choose? Are you there? Anyone? Feel free to unmute and just guess. What kind of device would we use to built an application that could do something that could send something, that could move something, that could compute something.
Microcontroller.
Okay, good. But would you necessarily use a microcontroller to do something very compute heavy, or if it needed
Then
to,
you'd
you know,
use a
screen?
microprocessor.
A microprocessor, great. So can you give me some examples of, so how would you build Node MCU or Arduino? Cool. Node MCU, it can run a very basic screen on a ESP. You would be able to connect a screen to it. It is possible, but NVIDIA Jetson, awesome. Yeah, see, this is a real, solid CPU and GPU as well, where it basically, Raspberry Pi, perfect. Very easily available devices where you can, build products around these devices. And there are a lot of products that actually use NVIDIA Jetsons and Raspberry Pis embedded in them. And there are really good ways of embedding them, not just with jumper wires. There are very scalable ways to install a Raspberry Pi into a computer and use it, for a high compute requirement. For example, if you're making a security camera, right? A home security camera, a Raspberry Pi might be able to solve that, and you'd be able to build a nice product around it as well. NVIDIA Jetson, Raspberry Pi, cool. Anything else? Node MCU, I'm going to say no. I would put that as the without GUI or the lower, the low power kind of BeagleBone. Excellent. BeagleBone, yeah. Cool. And I'm sure that you'll have also heard of, the Orange Pi and Banana Pi, all the other fruits. All of these are very similar. What they have is essentially an operating system running Linux, and you can, most Linux libraries, you can either build it for the system, or you can, just install it. Someone has already built it. So yeah, these are the different devices. On what basis do you decide which one to use? So a Raspberry Pi is, one of the lower. It can just about support a UI, I would say, unless you're looking at the Raspberry Pi 4, which is a little higher, but it can just about support a UI, very simple, basic UI. It cannot, you cannot give it too much of a compute heavy task, especially not if it involves machine learning. However, if you do need machine learning, and the Raspberry Pi seems to be the best fit for you, you could use something like an Intel Movidius, right, which is a neural compute stick. You can plug it into the Raspberry Pi, and that would make it it would be able to run CNNs much faster than it would be able to do on its single CPU. Right, so that's the Raspberry Pi. BeagleBone is also very similar. I think slightly lower compute power than the Raspberry Pi, but both of them have an HDMI out. But you could also connect a screen to it, right? There are LCD displays, touch screen, which you could connect. Jetson and Jetson Nano are specific, for machine learning applications because of the GPU, and it makes those available through various libraries. And if you need, something like, even the CPU is very fast. If you need a real-time video processing application, right, which is going through each frame, going through each pixel and running calculations, this is something that is going to get quite hot, right? But it would work. This is something where it will consume a lot of power, an NVIDIA Jetson, but it will, it'll handle the compute power, maybe even up to 2 or 3 cameras. It will be able to run a lot of algorithms on. One thing here is the Odroid, which is something very similar to these, but what it does, instead of running on, a bare bones Linux like Ubuntu or Raspbian, it runs Android. So that's something cool about if you want to do something on Android, that's the right board for you. So any questions on this part? And just to differentiate this from, the ESP32 and those kind of devices, these are generally high power devices, right? They take a lot of power, and you generally do not run the devices like this on a battery, and and you generally do not connect a screen to the other set of devices. So do you have any questions on this part? I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Nothing's pretty clear.
I'm sorry?
No, it's clear. There's another question.
I'm sorry. Could you type it in the chat? I'm finding it hard to hear you. I'll respond to you in the chat, okay? how do you embed these in a device? Okay, so Raspberry Pi is really easy to embed. You get something called the Raspberry Pi Compute Module. And what it is it's essentially the entire circuitry of a Raspberry Pi without all the connectors, right? So no HDMI, USB, Ethernet, none of those ports are there. It's just the chipset and on all the interconnections between the RAM, ROM, and radio. And they make the PCB in the shape of a RAM card, your DDR3 computer RAM card. It's called the compute module. And what you do is you build a PCB, and on your PCB which you design, you just need to drop in the connector, that DDR3 connector, and you can plug the Raspberry Pi into it, just like you install a RAM card, right? And you have a single PCB with this tiny little Raspberry Pi sitting on it, and all the other peripheral components, power, actuation, video output, video input, microphone input, whatever it is that you need to connect, you can do that through your PCB by routing it out. Since they consume a lot of power, so power is something you need to, the device will need to be powered, right? So when you put a Raspberry Pi in this kind of setting, you'll have a connector, a jack at the end of the device. You plug it in there. That goes into the power area of the PCB, which would step the voltage down, give you the 3.3 volts that will run it, stable 3.3 volts, probably up to 2 amps. Then those traces would go up to the module and it would power it. It would not work on. I mean, you could put a battery. You could give it maybe 30 minutes of battery life for 45 minutes of battery life. The size will go up. It's a trade-off between how long you want to run it and how large and heavy the device is going to be. So yeah.
So
CNNs
currently
with the
we are trying to build a real-time video processing module with NVIDIA Jetson. And the thing is that it consumes a lot of power. To have a long DC battery life is the real challenge we are facing here.
What do you mean it consumes a lot? Do you not have 220 volts available in your application for this?
No, sir. We plan it to be a mobile device, as in.
Okay, no. See, so
means you can walk freely with it.
No, putting an NVIDIA Jetson on, you're saying as a wearable, the NVIDIA Jetson, you can't use it as a wearable, man. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Have you seen the size of it?
Yes, sir. I have ordered it, but the onboard chip is really small. We plan to make a smart stick for visually impaired. So I was testing out the prototype with the NVIDIA Jetson.
Right. No, so see, when you're designing like this, right, one way to do it is backwards. I hope that you have spoken to at least 20, 30 users to understand what are the priority features for them. And if you were to work backwards, you should also give them prototype sticks, like fake sticks of different weights, right? And figure out at what weight they're not willing to use it anymore, right? And that is how you would define the device and the platform you're going to use. I honestly do not see it. I mean, if you're able to, clearly say that, okay, this is the kind of battery life we need, this is the weight of the stick that they're able to accept, and yes, we can pull it off by putting a Jetson in a backpack or something that they'll wear or something like that, then maybe we could do that. But I think you should check on that first. Otherwise, there might be better ways to do it, writing leaner, much simpler algorithm. Raspberry Pi can also do image processing, if you keep it simple enough. And then you can use a Raspberry Pi Zero, again, which takes a lot less power. You should be able to do that. So I would say a little more. I'm sorry.
The use case here was real-time video feedback. So real-time video feedback for that the NVIDIA Jetson has
OCR and all are things that I think are a little slow on the Raspberry Pi, right? And Jetson would run some. So I'm just saying if you're doing character recognition, that would be slightly. I think we should try it out on the Raspberry Pi, see how it goes before, because the way I see it, it's outside your constraint. And NVIDIA Jetson, just the portability and battery life of it, it would be a constraint in the product, in the device you're trying to build.
Okay.
I think you should rather focus on features that require less compute power. But again, that should be, you should convince me from the feature set driven by a user. So if your user is convinced that a certain feature set is relevant and is critical, then we'll figure out how to, make the Jetson do it. If the feature set is so critical that he's willing to add an extra 1 kilo to his backpack, now we have something to work. You know what I mean?
Sure, sir. Sure.
Excuse me, sir.
Right. So Azam has a suggestion for it, where he's saying that you can connect an ESP32 cam or
Beautiful,
yeah, to a phone
and process
right,
it on
as
the
a
phone.
hotspot.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Cool. So there was another question that came in.
Right. I think alternatives are running CNNs and Srinadev pieces. So CNNs, I think Jetson Nano is a good choice. Otherwise, anything with Movidius would be also used.
Yeah.
Right, like BeagleBone Pi with Movidius. They are actually video processing unit. Like Movidius is actually a video processing unit, and Jetson has a very powerful GPU, which works pretty well for CNN.
So, but for like image processing, wouldn't Raspberry Pi do the job? Because it's going to be a
Depends how
stable image.
complex it is, right? If you're doing, for say, imagine you want to find out the how much a person is. Okay, no, this is a bad example. Say you want to know how much a person's eyes are open or closed, right? First, you need to find where the face is. Then draw an arrow, kind of crop that as your region of interest, and then again look at where's the face in that, and then where are the eyes in that, sorry, and then map that out. Then you don't need to check. So depending on how many layers of complexity you're going into it, that's how much longer it's going to take, right? But there are also, if it's a very simple thing and there's just it shouldn't be too difficult.
Okay.
And
Otherwise,
PC,
you
correct
can
me if I'm
boost it.
wrong, but I think ML is generally faster. If you're just running a CNN real time, it would be a lot faster than actually using OpenCV and doing image processing, right?
Right. If
yeah,
you have
actually,
a good, nicely trained model and it aligns with the target, then
yeah,
obviously.
we're going to pre-train the models and then only run through another set of layers to detect the images, the objects in the image.
Yeah,
So
I suggest you try it and see the FPS you're getting after processing, and if it's not working well enough, then you could experiment with a Movidius.
Okay.
A
Excellent
Movidius
job.
is like a pen drive that you plug into the Raspberry as a device.
Right. But if you want to actually integrate it with the system, right? So as like Lyle was mentioning that there is a Pi, right, without the interfaces. There is, again, Movidius also comes without that as a simple chip, right? Which can be added to the
Right.
to the PCB.
Most DJI drones have it inbuilt as a chip.